Good evening. Welcome. When one begins to get serious about spirituality, it's easy to have an exaggerated notion of what it consists of and what the goal of spirituality is. Typically, you may look at your own life and see it as normalcy, as drudgery, as plodding along in a humdrum, mundane sort of an existence, and you may imagine that spirituality is somehow some amazing transcendence of that condition, or a solution to the problems that seem to present themselves in that condition, or some kind of a condition that contrasts extremely with the relative smallness and unsatisfying nature of normal human life, of a consensus reality kinds of an existence. And so it's easy to imagine this transcendental, wonderful condition where all of a sudden you won't have to pay taxes anymore and you won't need money, and the angels will be singing and carrying you around and bringing you manna from heaven and all this sort of thing. Which of course would be very nice, wouldn't it? Interestingly, the truth of spiritual reality is both much less than that fantasy and much more than that fantasy. It is much less than that fantasy in the sense that it turns out that the goal of the spiritual path, the actual condition that one realizes when one has successfully accomplished the spiritual quest, the spiritual search, turns out to be exactly where one started. You are still in your life. You are still a human being. You still have to pay taxes or not. You still, have to go to the bathroom. You still have to get food. You still have to maneuver through life. And this, of course, may seem to be much less than one might expect of this glorious transcendental condition that one would hope one would somehow transfer into or transit into as a result of spiritual realization. So in that sense, it is much less. But it is also very much more than that fantasy, because one discovers that what this so-called normal life actually consists of is absolutely inconceivable. It is a surpassingly strange condition, a surpassingly fascinating condition, a condition that is nothing other than awe-inspiring, while yet being just normalcy. Because, of course, it turns out that normalcy is not actually normalcy. Normalcy is not actually humdrum. Normalcy is not actually the pathetic horror of normal life that many people may think that it is. Normalcy is an astounding, inconceivable condition of transcendental force existing in infinity. The goal of what physicists pursue is the same goal that is realized at the end of the spiritual quest. The unified field, the true nature of reality, which of course is in full effect right here, right now. This is the goal of the scientific quest and the spiritual quest. This is this astounding condition, which of course is indescribable in present scientific terms, although they have gone to great strides to erect elaborate theories in an attempt to describe it. admirably so, but failingly, and likewise is equally indescribable in other terms, although again in spiritual texts and sacred books and so on and so forth, the words of holy men, all sorts of various fabulous, poetic and evocative descriptions and technical descriptions full of Sanskrit phrases and so on have been put forth in an attempt to try to indicate this, but failingly, because what this is cannot be captured in ideas. It is unthinkable. It is literally unthinkable. It is inconceivable in the sense that conception cannot capture what this is. Conception cannot capture the reality of the presence of light. Conception cannot capture the reality of the presence of consciousness. Conception cannot capture the reality of the presence of being. These phenomena are a simple present fact in everyone's experience, and yet it cannot be said what they are. They are absolutely beyond description. Modern science fails, although again with these admirable and very elaborate theories and measurements and mathematical formulations and so on and so forth. Wonderful approximations, but they miss the mark. And likewise, all of these wonderful sacred texts, as evocative as they are, haven't said the last word, haven't said what this actually is. Of course, it already is what it actually is. The goal of the scientific quest is in full effect right here. This is reality. This phenomena right here is what scientists aspire to understand, aspire to describe. You don't need to go to the core of stars. You don't need to go to distant galaxies. You don't need to smash atoms, because what you find when you pursue those avenues of investigation is just exemplifications of exactly the conditions that are in full effect right here, right now. And the same thing applies in the terms of a spiritual paradigm. What the goal of the spiritual quest is this reality that is omnipresent. It's always the case. It has not gone anywhere. It never will go anywhere. It is what it is, inalienably, and it is completely beyond description. In practical terms, the greatest impediment to begin to explore what this present reality consists of is the fact that most of us already think we know what it is. Generally unconsciously, and hence unexaminedly, we don't challenge our own notions. Oh, it's just the world. It's just space and time. It's just light. It's just consciousness. It's a byproduct of the central nervous system. So on and so forth. All of these, formulas that are just held to be true. They're self-evident. Well, of course this is just space. This is just time. This is just gravity. This is just light. This is the four fundamental forces of the universe. This is, electromagnetic fields interacting. Depending on how sophisticated your modeling of what this is, you'll have typically some way of holding it to be something. And we don't usually go far enough in our self-examination to notice that in actual fact we don't have a clue what any of these things are, and these claims to knowledge, these claims to understanding, are in actual fact just empty formulations. Consciousness is a byproduct of the central nervous system. Okay, that sounds really good, doesn't it? It sounds meaningful, it sounds pithy. What does it mean? What is the central nervous system? The fact of consciousness is self-evident. what it is entirely elusive in terms of describing it or understanding it. The fact of the central nervous system, likewise, is equally mysterious. What is the central nervous system? Well, it's biochemical systems. It's matter interacting in accordance with DNA and chemical properties and so on and so forth. Okay, well, that's very impressive, but what is that? Well, gosh, now that you mention it, I don't really know. So, having claimed that consciousness is simply that, I haven't said anything with any content because I don't really know what these notions refer to. No one knows what these notions refer to. You could get the greatest Nobel Prize-winning scientists that ever lived all together in this room and ask any one of them, what is consciousness? What is matter? What is energy? And to a man or woman, they would say, well, we don't really know. We can say a lot about it. We have a lot of very sophisticated theories and measurements and mathematical formulas that describe aspects of the way it seems to be when we observe it, but we don't really know what it is. We don't really know how it is. We don't really know how it works. And it turns out that this admission of ignorance is the beginning of true investigation. Because, of course, if you think you already know what something is, you're not going to look very hard at examining what it is because you're already convinced you know. It's like trying to convince someone who's an affiliate of a political party that their views are wrong. They already know they're right, so you're going to argue with them, and it's not liable to do a lot of good, is it? And likewise, these sorts of worldviews that we typically hold unconsciously, and we don't even know we're holding them. Typically, we just accept that it's true that these things are the way that they are, and I sort of more or less know what that is. Matter is matter, consciousness is consciousness, space and time is space and time. It's all from the Big Bang or whatever, right? Whatever degree of elaborate theory you sort of are resting on. So, the beginning of actual investigation is noticing that, in actual fact, you don't really know what anything is. You don't know what anything is to any degree. And that is a very good starting point for accurate investigation, because then you can begin to explore unbiasedly. You can begin to explore with genuine curiosity, and you can begin to assimilate the actual evidence of your experience outside of the context of these a priori theories and a priori worldviews that just constipate our understanding. They completely blocks our approach to what is going on here.
So, Peter, I'm tempted to say that all sounds great, but it's not so easy. I've done a lot of thinking about the nature of kind of worldviews and consciousness and kind of how we create the world from this sense of perceptions, and then we can create conceptually a world out there that has some dimensionality and some solidity. And it's very easy to see how none of those things are. It's very easy logically to go through the investigation and see how none of those things really exist.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know if it's easy, but anyway, it's doable.
Right.
But it doesn't get you out of the trap of thinking you know what it is. Even if I can say that this room that we're in, which seems to be out there and seems to have this dimensionality and existence, and I know that it's created by some sensation that I'm interpreting as light, and using my binocular vision I create two images, and then somehow my brain puts them together and makes it look like space has dimensionality, and there's some kind of blah blah blah. So I can come up with this very clear explanation of how that illusion is created.
Mm-hmm.
But now I've got a concept.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've got a concept of what's going on.
Right.
That, in a sense, loosens my investment in the fact that there is a world out there that's separate from my perception of it. But it doesn't get me out of the trap of thinking I know what's going on. Does that make sense?
Sure. Well, if you proceed with the modus operandi you suggest, and you proceed a layer and you dismantle one assumption, one degree of taking for granted that things are a certain way, and analyze it logically down to a more let's say primordial condition, and that's all fine. But if you then settle for that model, you're no better off than you were, or anyway, not much better off than you were at your starting point. So, if you want to proceed with that kind of a logical analysis or deconstruction, then it behooves you to keep at it. So the next layer is to criticize every element of that model until you see, well, that I don't know, that doesn't really hold water anyway. It's a nice assertion, and it's certainly not untrue, but how much do I really know what that is? And again, of course, you will ultimately be able to proceed to at least another layer of deconstruction, let's say, analysis. And certainly you could say, it's possible to just do that forever, peeling the layers of the onion. And indeed, it may well be. But there is... And that is valuable. That's a powerful tool in our toolbox to chip away at our assumptions and really bring to the fore that, wait a minute, I'm talking through my hat here. I'm using these terms as if I really knew what they were, and if I look really close, it's questionable at least, if not absurd. So that is a powerful technique, a powerful tool. But it's a negative tool. It's a tool of trying to take away misunderstanding. And it turns out we have a whole nother approach that is profoundly powerful, which is positivity. Because if we deconstruct and deconstruct and deconstruct and theoretically got down to nothingness, that would be fine. But this isn't a nothingness, is it? This is a positivity. This is an actuality. This is a positive condition in the sense that it is positively what it is, whatever that is. And we are in that positivity. We are that positivity, right? you are here, leaving aside what we mean by those terms, leaving aside any kind of an accurate definition, but whatever that refers to is in fact the case, in whatever sense it is the case. But it's not nothing. It's not nothing. So if we deconstruct all error, remove all misconception, we haven't destroyed reality. We haven't taken away experience. We haven't stopped the flow of events, so-called. Although it may be questionable whether it's a flow and whether it's events, but whatever it is still the case. So there is this positivity, there is this actuality that we have access to because we are it. We are actual. We are actually here. We are actually engaged in our experience. In whatever sense leaving aside that we don't know what we mean by that, nonetheless it refers to some actuality, some actual condition, some actual positivity. And since we are in this positivity, we have access to it non-verbally, non-conceptually, and we may have, it turns out we do have, but just for the sake of argument, we may have sufficient inherent intelligence in this native condition to be able to approach it non-verbally in a manner that is yet assimilative and somehow inculcates some kind of knowledge or understanding. So, by all means proceed with deconstructing error, deconstructing assertions, false assertions of understanding, false worldviews. By all means keep punching holes in that. But at the same time, you can work from the other end with the fact that you exist. You are. Existence is. Your experience is an actuality. Again, leaving aside what it is, what any of these terms mean, but nonetheless, it is the case that what those words refer to is something. It's not nothing in any simple sense. And so as such, it is explorable, it is participatable in, it is engageable with. In fact, you are engaged with it, you are participating in it inextricably. You can't stop it, there's no off switch to experience. So, and this nonverbal approach, this direct participatory approach, this irrational approach, can be coupled with, to whatever degree your nature finds a point of balance, with a more rational analytical approach. And between the two, you'll sort of be gnawing away at both sides of the conundrum.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Well, I guess to the degree that I've tried to do that, I mean, what I get at is experience somehow gets, I want to say softer, that's the wrong word, but it becomes less defined. It becomes more what it is, but it's less able to find out what that is. I mean, I'm thinking of like my relationship to my dreams, has really changed over the last year or two.
Uh-huh.
And they're much, in a sense, much more real and present, but it's much less clear what they are. It's and my waking consciousness, or whatever you want to call it, kind of does a similar thing. It becomes less and less defined.
Right. Okay, but in what sense are you understanding clear, and what sense are you understanding defined? If your dreams are becoming more and more present, that sounds to me like more and more defined. And if what is becoming more present is a lack of definition, maybe that's what the dreams are. Maybe your expectation that they should become clearer, that they should become somehow graspable or understandable, or click into some kind of an order or logic, maybe that's a preconception that is erroneous. Maybe it's a preconception that the actuality of what you're investigating is not going to measure up to. I would suggest that simply saying, for example, in the case of your dreams, if they're becoming more present in some sense, whatever that means, then that in itself is an assimilation of understanding, an assimilation of knowing, an assimilation of clarity. Even if it's a kind of clarity that doesn't conform to your expectation of what clarity should be, maybe reality is intrinsically unclear, and maybe seeing that fact is the actuality of clarity. Okay? I think this is a very, very common conundrum for people that are, doing spiritual investigation at a deeper level, where they're beginning to find interesting experience that is clearly vital and dynamic, but it has a nebulosity to it. It has an indeterminacy to it. It has a lack of resolvability. And I think this is often interpreted, as you're suggesting, possibly suggesting, as a lack of clarity or a failure to penetrate more intimately, to really find out what it is. But again, this is on the assumption that what you find is going to conform to a clarity that you expect to be there. And I don't want to bias your investigations, but I would say you may discover that this turns out not to be the case. You may discover that this condition is a lot more indeterminate, a lot more dreamlike, a lot more unresolved than we expect it to be.
Yeah, I guess that's been my experience. I mean, there was a point at which I did a lot of dream work, and I realized I went into that with the expectation that, with the kind of idea that what was going to happen is that my dreams would become clearer, they would become lucid and clear and real, like my waking life. And what I find is that the almost exact opposite has happened. That the reality of my waking life is much more like what I used to think of as dream reality. Mm-hmm.
Isn't that interesting?
It is very interesting. Thanks.
This is a constant problem in spiritual work, and especially in more advanced spiritual work, is coming up against these subtle expectations of what we hope to find, what we expect to find, how things are going to resolve themselves. We think we know what genuine clarity will be. We think we know what genuine discovery will be. And of course we don't, or there would be no need of investigation. The need for spiritual investigation is based on the fact that we don't know what the final condition actually is, what reality actually is. And we discover ultimately, by the school of hard knocks, that reality measures up to itself alone. Reality conforms to its own nature alone. It will not conform to your expectations, and it will certainly transcend any expectations whatsoever that you bring to it before the fact, because reality is so uniquely and definitively what it is, and the way that it is. But that's a uniqueness and a definitiveness that may not conform to your expectations of what uniqueness and definitiveness ought to be. So in short, probably the final lesson we learn is to let reality show you what it is. To really surrender to, it is the way it is, and show me. Because it will not conform to your expectations. It's a guarantee, it's a fact. And again, it's easy to have subtle expectations where we really think we're being very naked and open and sophisticated and, intelligent with it, but we can still have these very subtle, sort of expectations. It should be clear, it should resolve, it should come into focus. Maybe reality is a lack of focus, intrinsically, in which case discovering what reality is clearly would be discovering lack of focus. But of course it's important to restate that what reality is cannot be said. So defining it in terms of anything is an absurdity. Defining it in terms of focus or lack of focus is too heavy-handed and too definitive for the actuality. Reality is all you can say about reality is exactly what it is. And any notions that you try to use to describe it are going to be approximate, are going to be pitifully approximate, uselessly approximate. Because the actuality of reality is completely paradoxical in human terms. Of course, reality conforms to all human notions, because all human notions have been derived from reality. And so we have all these astounding array of totally contradictory, paradoxical, mutually exclusive notions. Good, bad, light, dark. Clear, unclear, focused, unfocused. Determinate, indeterminate, causal, acausal, etc., which are mutually exclusive and opposite, and yet they're all true. So how do you possibly make sense of that? Well, you don't. Reality does not make sense. Reality is completely incoherent in logical human terms. But fortunately, that's not a problem, because we are neither logical nor human. So we can go there because we are there. We are real. So the conditions of reality we conform to already because we are that. So we can meet reality where it is directly without needing to rely upon rationality or human logic.
Hi, Peter. In the middle of your talk, this question jumped into my mind, and the question was, is, say, the cedar in Lebanon imbued with the same consciousness that you are?
If it's in my consciousness, it is. If it's not in my consciousness, it doesn't exist.
No, say it's in your consciousness, and it's also imbued in the cedar that's in Lebanon, assuming there's still some left, because I think Gary Snyder said most of them were cut down by the Phoenicians to build boats, but there must be one or two over there. But anyway, so it's the same. What's the answer?
The cedars of Lebanon exist as nothing other than my consciousness as an idea. Just like you exist as nothing but my consciousness as vision and sound and ideas.
Okay, can we...
In other words, you exist in my experience, and as far as I know, that's the only existence you have. You may or may not actually exist in your own terms, but I can't know that. So that's your problem.
Okay.
But as far as I'm concerned,
All right.
your existence is solely my consciousness, right? Because the evidence for me that you exist all exists within my consciousness and therefore consists of my consciousness. You see what I mean?
Okay. So can we throw in the rings of Saturn on that one too?
Sure. Well, I've seen the rings of Saturn, so they definitely exist in my consciousness, at least as a memory now.
Yeah.
And certainly as an idea. And if I had a telescope, they would exist as a reality, too. If Saturn was above the horizon, which it isn't.
But
In other words, the important thing to understand here is experience equals consciousness equals reality. Okay? Equals existence. So what exists in your experience. What exists for you exists in your experience. Anything that does not exist in your experience does not exist for you. It's like a dream. It's like a dream that you've never had and you're never going to have. In what sense can it possibly exist? Right? Someone that you've never met, that no one you've ever met will ever meet, and you're never going to meet, and no one you've ever met is ever going to meet. In what sense do they exist?
Okay, let me chew on that.
I mean, it's important to understand reality is experiential presence. You know, if I say to you, "Oh, there's pink alien elephants walking around this room," what would you say to me? You'd say, "Not in my experience." You know, the idea exists in my experience because I said it, you heard it, if you were paying attention. So the idea exists in your experience, but you might, maybe you do, maybe you see pink alien elephants now, I don't know. But if you don't see pink alien elephants, you'll say, you're nuts. It's just not real. Not in my world. Maybe you're seeing them, maybe in some sense they are real. Maybe you're nuts. You might say to me, I'm nuts because I see them when you don't. Or maybe they actually do exist in some strange, inexplicable way, and I can see them and you can't. But we can't possibly get our heads around that. It's like you talk to someone that's, a rabid conservative Republican or something, or some extreme political belief that is contrary to what you may have, for example. And they'll tell you what's real in their world, and you'll listen to it and you go, what are you talking about? This is gibberish. What planet are you from? You're a crazy person. You're seeing things that I don't see. So all you can say is, well, maybe so. And that may be true for you in your world in some sense, but it's not true for me in my world because I don't see it. So the important point that this is trying to illustrate is reality is what you experience. Reality is what you see. Reality is what proves itself to you. Reality is what reveals itself to you. Not what you understand of it, not what you think of it, but what is actually there. So you may not understand light, but light is actually here. Right? You may not understand consciousness, but consciousness is actually here. And you can say, yeah, consciousness is here. I may say, I couldn't possibly say what it is, but it's undeniable that something that I could refer to as consciousness is undeniably present. So it's real. It exists because it exists in your experience. And all you can say that is for you. In short, you are the sole inhabitant of your own universe. And there may be other beings that are the sole inhabitant of their own universe, but you can never know that because all you can see of them is their apparition in your universe, at which point they're no longer them, they're you. right? Like if you go to sleep and you dream about me in your dream, I'm there in your universe in your dream. I may or may not be there in some objective sense, but you can't possibly know that. You can't know whether I'm actually here or not. You may be hallucinating all this. You may be, in a straitjacket somewhere in some mental ward, and you're hopelessly psychotic and you don't know it, and you're having this intense hallucination that you live in Berkeley and you've gone to a spiritual talk in the Hillside Club, right? And you're actually drooling over in a corner somewhere in a straitjacket, right? You can't know whether or not I'm actually here, but for you, I am here in your experience if you experience what you think of as me. And you can't know whether or not I'm experiencing you in my world. You can hypothesize I may well be. I may well actually exist in the sense that you exist. I can hypothesize that you may well actually exist in the sense that I exist, but I can't know it. This is just a matter of being honest with what we can be certain of, what we can verify. It's easy to assume, everyone, I exist, so everyone exists, and they're probably just the same as me, And so if I really exist and I'm seeing my experience, then you probably exist and you're seeing your experience too. But that's a fantasy. I can't know that. I can't verify it. It's a notion. It's an abstraction. That is not a reality for me that I can be certain of. So that's sort of a longer version of the Cedars question.
Hi. Hi. So what is there to do about all that? The fact that we can't verify anything. It sounds as if we can't verify anything about ourselves even, or about the life that we lead or thought we have led. Or where does that leave us?
Well, it levels the playing field in terms of examining what is the case. So if you can't verify anything, you can't analyze anything, you can't be certain of your definitions of anything.
Right.
But in saying that and in seeing the truth of that, this still is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It hasn't gone away. It's not like an old-fashioned TV where all it goes bloop to a dot and then vanishes, right? So you can't. This doesn't conform to your previous expectations of it and the sort of consensus worldview of what it is, but it's not nothing, is it? And so that's interesting. So you can begin to be with that nakedly, you can begin to be with that openly, without conceiving of it, without pretending you understand it, and explore it very intimately, experientially. And let it show you what it is. Not in logical terms, not in rational terms, not in terms you'll be able to verbalize, but just refresh your familiarity with the intimacy of experience, with the dynamism of experience, with the positivity of experience, with the intelligence and intense aesthetic patterning of experience, in an irrational, non-verbal manner. Because the rational verbal manners are all bullshit. They're partial, they're assertions, they're fantasy, they're abstractions. But this is not an abstraction, is it? This is actual. There's actuality here, and that's powerful. So this is something, it's not nothing. And you're something, because you're here. Whatever that, you can't say what that is, but it's not nothing.
Yeah.
So you can be with that nakedly, be with that non-conceptually, and just sort of swim around in it and see what that feels and see how much it can reveal itself to you with intelligence in a direct, non-verbal way.
Yeah, that makes sense the way you just said it. And I guess the thing that I notice a lot from what you say is that certainly probably a good thing to do at the very beginning is to eliminate expectations of all kinds.
Yeah. Expectations are our biggest impediment. Because when you think you know something, when you think you know what something is or how something ought to be or how something is going to resolve, that essentially blocks you from assimilating what it actually is to the extent what it actually is diverges from your expectation, which it certainly will. Mm-hmm. Because actualities always transcend fantasy. Actualities always transcend conception.
Yes.
Right? You can imagine what a beautiful sunset is going to look like, but then when you see the beautiful sunset, there's no way that your expectation is not a pale, paltry thing in the face of the actuality.
Right, yeah. But beyond eliminating expectations, it seems like the way is like pretty much completely open, which
yes,
yes,
the way is openness. But fortunately, openness, we have aplenty. You are openness. Your experience is openness. What shows up in your experience is openness. So that way is doable because openness is available. Right? In fact, you have to manufacture or imagine closeness because you can't actually find it in nonverbal experience. You can't find closeness. Where's closeness?
Yeah. Thank you.
The field of experience is infinitely open. I think we have
Hi, Peter.
Hi.
I need some kindness around this question I'm about to ask. I was for the past few years, fairly, just kind of going moment by moment in my life and feeling pretty connected to my experience and somewhat insular in that, in the sense of not trying to educate myself about what's going on elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, things like the newspaper or finding out those kinds of things. I wasn't prioritizing that.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt fairly blissful.
Mm-hmm.
The ups and downs that I had were related to what was directly in front of me. And more recently, the world situation has come more into my field of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm feeling a lot of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about my direct experience. It's all this information that I've allowed to come in about power structures and a possible future that is very restricted for all people on our planet.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wasn't giving that much energy before. And for the past week or so, I was like shaking in fear,
Mm-hmm.
like really, and not having any idea what to do either.
Uh-huh.
This new information, or for some reason my consciousness, like the movement in my consciousness focused on that.
Right.
And I'm just wondering about intentionality and well, what I've heard Advaita teachers speak of before is that we're really not controlling that, like my ego, my small self is not really determining what's happening moment by moment. It's just that a movement in consciousness now went and focused on the world situation and is having emotions. And so the thing to do is just to keep following along. Mm-hmm. However, I'd like to be able to do something, or I'd like to have a way to feel better. I don't know if that's even okay to ask for, or wish for.
Doesn't hurt to ask, right?
but I mean, like, a year ago when I wasn't thinking about this, it was like, I was just so inspired to get up and do what I do and be around people, and there was a lot of meaning and purpose. I would jump out of bed, like full of energy.
Uh-huh.
And it's hard for me to, in this past week, have that energy.
Uh-huh.
Because I feel crestfallen. I feel like no matter how much energy I have, or it's just, I don't know, I just feel fearful.
Uh-huh. I understand. Okay. In terms of the spontaneity of the flow of your consciousness, the spontaneity of the flow of your experience, clearly you have gone into this sort of a mode of being with things, and this is, of course, fine. You can go, you have the freedom to go wherever you can go, and certainly wherever you do go, and essentially you will go through wherever you go and move into whatever you're going to move into, which is, probably obvious and simplistic to say. But having said that, I can say a lot about the kind of condition you're describing. When you formulate a vision of, to any degree of the way things are, and then react to that formulation, the formulation you have is a fantasy to the extent that the actuality of the situation will inevitably diverge from your understanding of it. In other words, you can't know even if you, say, I don't know the specifics of what you've been following, but say you're following global economics or political situation or ecology or whatever, politics, simply the detail of actual events is going to far transcend your understanding of it. Even if you read if you spent 24 hours a day reading every word on the internet about various situations, the actuality of those situations is totally transcending what information you're able to assimilate about them, just simply by virtue of being more detailed, let alone diverging significantly from the way that the information that is put out about these situations is spun, or is partial, or is biased. Number one. Number two, so not only can you not know what's actually happening, you certainly can't know what's going to happen. I mean, none of us here knows what's going to happen 60 seconds from now, right here, right now. You don't know what words are going to be said, you don't know what motions are going to be happening, you don't know whose bodies are going to be moving in what way, you don't know if there's going to be major transitions like a fire truck suddenly bursting through that wall because the driver had a heart attack as he was driving. I mean, anything can happen, right? A comet can come down and smash into us. We don't know what's going to happen. So not only do we not know what is happening at any moment, especially in as complex an array as a global situation, right? You can't know. You don't know what it is now. You don't know where it's going, because it will certainly go someplace other than anyone expects it to, because event is surprising, right? No one can predict what's going to happen. No one can predict surprises. No one can predict accidents. No one can predict just spontaneous events. People decide to do different things than we thought they were going to do. Some announcement is made in the news that affects things in a big way that no one knew was coming, or whatever, right? Who knows? Someone gets assassinated. Obama gets assassinated tonight, and wow! All of a sudden, bang! Bam, bang! Everything's different, and everyone freaks out, and this. But tomorrow looks very different than anyone would have thought because everything's been rearranged. But everything will inevitably be rearranged, maybe in arguably smaller ways, but in no less complete ways, right? Do you follow me? So if you have an emotional reaction like fearfulness or pessimism or something like that to a scenario that you're understanding or supposing is occurring, you're reacting to a fantasy. It may be a well-informed fantasy. It may even be a very intelligent fantasy, but it's a fantasy nonetheless. And that means it diverges from actuality. Thing. And there'd be nothing to worry about. But, facetiousness aside, the important point here to understand is that there's nothing wrong with forming yourself and trying to understand what is going on, but that will be part of the causal flow of events that will certainly go into totally unexpected directions in the long term and even in the short term. Because no one knows what's going to happen. No one knows what other people are going to do tomorrow. I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. I don't know what I'm going to do in 30 seconds. And what I do will change everything. I say one thing happens, I say another thing happens, And imagine how much more that is the case if a world leader says one thing or a world leader says another thing. Obama doesn't know what he's going to say tomorrow. He doesn't know word for word what he's going to say. No matter how well his handlers are trying to script him. And he may say something that will have repercussions that leads to something, and all of a sudden, bang, we're off into a whole new flow of events that no one would have expected. Do you follow what I'm saying? In other words, so to react too seriously to your understanding of what's happening, especially not in your immediate experience, like in something abstract like the media, is to be really lost in fantasy. And you can't, and since it is fantasy, it's not reliable, so it's not worth too much of an investment, it's not worth too much of a reaction. It's a hypothetical future, and I can imagine hypothetical futures that are horrible. I mean, I can imagine horrible plagues and wars and devastation and comets smashing into the earth, and it's easy to imagine that, and it may well happen, right? But I'm not going to get all worked up about it because I realize that it's just a possibility. There's other possibilities. Maybe a genius, a political economic genius will appear in the news next week who is going to turn the whole world of flow of events around, and it's not included in my model. But I'm not going to get too excited about that because it's only another possibility. See what I mean? And so the way you're thinking of these things is actually it's a possibility that things are the way you imagine them. But because it's only a possibility and not a certainty, it's silly to put too much investment in it in terms of letting it bother you or getting too excited about it or anything like that. Does that make sense?
It's really reassuring, actually. And it feels like just being in the moment it's easier and it's more dependable.
But you have your direct experience, You as you said, you were having a very positive approach to life. You were being genuine. You were relating to your life. You had an enthusiasm. You had your life expression was flowing in an effective way. And here in this other mode, you're sort of feeling negative and feeling depressed. And it's all about things that aren't even actually 100% true. So you can kind of do the math yourself and see, well, wait a minute, here's these two modes. which makes more sense, Even on a moment-to-moment basis, it's pretty evident which one is more valuable.
This is highly useful. Thank you.
Sure. This is a really paramount principle. Not only can you not know what's going to happen, but you can't even know what is happening, even within your own experience. You can't know what's happening right here, right now in this room. It's too complicated. There's no way you can assimilate it into a coherent whole, right? I mean, all of this is going on. How many thousands of light bulbs are here? How can you possibly track get a handle on what's going on with each one of those, and what each person here is thinking and what they're doing and what their bodies are doing and what the molecules in the wood floor do. I mean, this is just an inconceivably intricate situation, just what's right here. So not only can you not know what's going to happen, but you can't comprehensively know even what is happening in so simple a venue as just this, just what's right in front of your eyes, right? So when you see that, it puts a different complexion upon thinking, knowing what's going on, in any sense. And you participate in what's going on in a profound way. But you can't do it through a comprehensive understanding. You do it through the more sort of intuitive flow of your life force, your urges. You react to the situation, you meet a situation the way that you do because of your nature and the way your energy flows into it. And it's not based on you knowing everything, right? It's not based on, I know exactly what's going on here, so I'm going to do the right thing. It's not like that, is it? You don't do the right thing, you do your thing. Because you're you, and that's what you do. That's what everyone does. I mean, I'm here, I'm doing my thing, right? If I was someone else, I'd be doing something else. Someone else would be here doing something else, right? You're here, you're doing your thing. The person sitting next to you is sitting there doing their thing. And if you were them, you'd be doing their thing. But you're not, you're you. Do you follow me? So, in other words, life is living itself already in the moment. And it doesn't make any sense to itself, and it doesn't understand itself in any narrative sense, in any sense of interpretation or comprehension or having a elaborate description of what's going on.
This doesn't mean that you shouldn't care.
Of course not. Have at it.
I used to like something that Alan Watts used to either quote or maybe, I'm not sure whether it was his own or from some scientist, whatever, but anyway, it was that not only are things stranger than we imagine, they are stranger than we can imagine.
Right. I personally like everything Alan Watts said.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty self-evident, but what's happening here is inconceivable. It's inconceivable. There's no way you can get your head around what's happening. But it's happening anyway. You don't need to get your head around it. Isn't that nice? It's doing itself, right? And here you are, and you're doing yourself too. And you don't need you've never understood who you are and why you do what you do. You certainly never understood who other people are and why they do what they do, God knows, right? But it all just does itself, sweeping along with just, this wild flow of events. And it's completely unfathomable. But it is what it is, and it's already doing itself. And that fact is already the case. It can't be stopped. It can't be modified. It can't be adjusted. There's no gear shift. There's no brakes. There's no off switch. See the flow of reality. It's off and running, isn't it? Where's it going? Who knows? Who knows?
Okay, I've got a question from the internet. Presence is the touchstone, but presence has no anchor point.
Right.
What
Presence
can you
is
say?
its own anchor point. The only anchor point.
So, can you
The
say-
only frame of reference whatsoever, the only actual frame of reference is presence itself. And presence, even though completely obvious, is completely transcendental quality. So as a touchstone, it kind of leaves you in the middle of nowhere in kind of a fun way. Yeah, look at this. Look at presence, right? I mean, this is present, right? Your experience is present. You are present. Your consciousness is present. This presence is a completely obvious thing. It's a fundamental, primal thing. It's always present. You can be in the midst of falling asleep, and that is absolutely present. It's front and center, right? You're in the dream. The dream is present. You're here. Here is present. You're confused and fuzzed out and drunk and sick and have a fever. That's present. So this presence is absolutely always the case. Undeniable, self-evident quality. But what is it? What is this presence? How does it work? How is this present? What is it that's present? How is it present? You know? It's completely obvious, completely nakedly in your face, right? Obviously. And yet it's completely transcendental. It's completely elusive. It's completely slippery. There's no way you can get a handle on it. How is this present? What is it? What is this presence, you know? I mean, it's the same question as what is consciousness? Well, it's self-evident. Yeah, consciousness is here. There's consciousness here, right? Sure. This is totally obvious to everyone, I'm sure, right? But what is this? What is this consciousness? You know? What is it? How is it here? And all of a sudden, it's completely obvious, completely nakedly present, nakedly apparent that it is here, that it is the case, and yet you go looking for it, you can't find it. It's the weirdest thing. It's just completely strange. And yet that's how it is, isn't it? You know? It's something that is obvious and unfindable. Isn't that interesting? You know? Isn't that an interesting state of affairs?
They're good for now.
What's that?
The person who asked that one is good for now.
Oh, okay.
He's tripping.
QED.
Or she, I don't know. I think it's a he. Let me see. She or he? It's a he. Happy camper.
So, Peter, what you're saying is that the goal or the objective is not to understand the presence, but to just be with it.
Sure. I mean, notice first that you don't understand it. Notice that it is. Notice that you are with it. It's not that you have a choice between being with it and not being with it. But notice that it is and try to let it show you how it is, even though it's evidently unresolvable as anything you can get a handle on and wrap your mind around. But nonetheless, you can notice it. You can explore it, even if only obliquely and very subtly and very strangely, in the sense that you don't know what it is you're exploring and you don't even know how you're exploring it. But nonetheless, you can notice, wow, there is this presence. Isn't that interesting? What can I find out about it? Well, you can't even find it, so you, in a superficial sense, you can't find out anything about it. But that doesn't mean, nonetheless, that you can't explore it in a strange, irrational way and actually become quite familiar with it and integrate with it very, very profoundly again, in an irrational, perhaps unresolved way.
Thank you.
You know, and this brings our attention to the very nature of actual spirituality. It does not make any sense. It is not a rational process. It is not a logical process. It is not a logical means to a reasonable goal. It is a very strange, very mysterious prospect that is involved with an indeterminate, if any, goal. Every aspect of this exploration becomes stranger and stranger as you proceed in it, and the point becomes less to reach the end of it or to find the goal of it than to explore this strangeness and discover this strangeness and have it show itself to you, to learn, to notice and appreciate just how strange life is, how strange being is, how strange reality is. And in that strangeness, we may forget about things like goals and process and logic, and yet we may find life, we may find wholeness, we may find meaningfulness, we may find a completeness and a contact with actuality, which may prove to be supremely satisfying.
Peter, I feel that reality has been telling me what it is all my life. And it's been telling me conceptually, and it's been a very partial telling that conceivably has been wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're saying it will show you what it is, you're not necessarily saying conceptually. In fact, you're probably ruling that out.
Not ruling that out. Conceptualization is included in reality, of course, because it's reality that is doing conceptualization, obviously, or it wouldn't exist. But reality includes so much that is non-conceptual, right? Your sensory experience is non-conceptual. It's not a concept, right? What you're seeing right now is not a thought. It's not an idea. What you're hearing, that you're hearing, is not a thought. It's not an idea, and so on and so forth. All the sense fields, the presence of mental experience, the presence of subtler mental experience, whatever qualities of experience that are present as your experience right now is not conceptual. Even concepts are not conceptual, right? Concepts don't exist because you conceive that they exist. They exist because they actually exist, right? Thought, in other words, thought exists. Thought is a spontaneously present, call it energetic phenomenon in consciousness, right? Whatever. But it actually exists, so thought doesn't exist because you think it exists. Thought exists because it actually exists. And then you interpret that actuality as the chain of thoughts and arguments and logic and blah, blah, blah. But thought itself is not a concept. So even concepts aren't a concept. So sure, there's all of this conceptual content, there's all of our thoughts, there's all of our ideas, there's all of our theories, and they can be very elaborate and sophisticated and intelligent. But the vast, vast, vast majority of your actual real-time experience is non-conceptual and cannot be conceived of because it is itself, it is what it is. Your field of vision is not a thought, it's an energetic presence. And there's no way you can formulate an accurate thought that includes what it is, that encompasses it, that defines it. I mean, the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words, just scratches the surface of indicating this fact. You see a beautiful sunset and it's just obvious right there. It's not an idea, it's not a thought. Someone can write a paragraph or a page or a book about this incredible sunset they saw, and you can read every word, and it will not be the sunset, will it? Because the sunset is not a thought. And the thoughts, no matter how elaborate, no matter how intelligent, no matter how inspired, cannot equal the non-verbal, non-conceptual fact of the presence of a sunset. And this same, of course, applies to any experience whatsoever, which is non-conceptual. What you're seeing right now, how could you describe it? You could, you could say, well, I'm sitting in a room that's kind of dark with a lot of gaudy lights around and some chairs and some people sitting in it, and wearing sort of semi-colorful, muted clothes. Well, that's accurate. That's an accurate statement. It's not untrue, but does that series of words definitively capture the actuality of my experience? It's an absurdity. It doesn't even, start. Just like the aspects of the gleam on one rivet on one of these chairs, I could write an encyclopedia about and I wouldn't capture it. It's just too subtle, it's too amazing, it's too astounding. And yet, it itself completely embodies itself with no words in an instant. See what I mean? The completeness of the experience is right there non-conceptually, without anything missing, without anything left unsaid. Right? So we are immersed in the non-conceptual. We are non-conceptual ourselves. All of our experience is non-conceptual. Even our concepts are non-conceptual. So all we really need to do is notice the non-conceptual non-conceptually. Right? Now, we're used to thinking about things. We're thought junkies. We're completely addicted to thought. I look at something and I start thinking about it. It's automatic. It's the human mode. We typically do this. And that's not a problem, because the thought doesn't stop the nonverbal experience, does it? So I'm looking at the gleam of lights on that rivet, this astounding gleam of lights, and I'm thinking about it and I'm talking about it, but the gleam is still there. The nonverbal experience is still there. The fullness of that is not blocked by thinking about it, is not impeded in any way or diminished by thoughts, by words, by talking. So our nonverbal experience is completely present and completely available, no matter how much we're thinking. Thought and direct experience is not an either-or. They coexist. When you're thinking, you don't stop seeing, you don't stop hearing, you don't stop feeling, do you? So none of which are concepts. These are actualities. These are actual experience, whatever it is. We can't get a handle on what it is, obviously. But it's just really a matter of noticing this direct experience. Noticing that this direct experience, this nonverbal experience, is profound. It has a vitality to it, doesn't it? It has a content. It has an import. It has just an aesthetic sense, if nothing else, right? Things strike you a certain way. You see something and it strikes you. Whatever. You may simplify it by saying you like it or you don't like it. It's beautiful. It's not beautiful. It's boring. It's interesting. But those simplifications don't begin to capture. You see one thing, it hits you a certain way. You see anything else, it hits you a little bit differently, doesn't it? You see anything else, it hits you a little bit different. So there's a lot of content in this nonverbal experience, in this non-conceptual experience, and that content is intelligence. That content is meaningfulness. That content is actual content. And just because it's non-conceptual, and we're conceptual junkies, conceptual chauvinists, we think if you can't put it into a concept, it's meaningless. It's nothing. But that's not true, is it? A beautiful sunset, you can't put it into concepts, but it sure isn't nothing, is it? Anyone, you have to be a real crab to look at a beautiful sunset and not go, just wow. It's just universal. It's completely obvious. And the same applies to any direct sensory experience. It's impactful, right? It has flavor, it has nuance, it has, just qualities. It hits you a certain way. And that is an embodiment of meaningfulness, an embodiment of intelligence. But it doesn't make any sense. And so if your conceptual chauvinism is insisting you have to translate it into a sentence or a logical statement that you can then, hold on to, you're pretty much shit out of luck, because it ain't going to happen very well, right? You can go around trying to describe all your nonverbal experience in words all you want, but ultimately it's going to be a pretty pale reflection of the real thing, isn't it? So that's what I mean by it showing you what it is. It won't show you what it is in a way that is a logical explanation or a logical dissertation, but it is contentful. It conveys a fullness. It conveys a meaningfulness that may be indefinable, but it's not nothing. It's substantial, right? And that substantiality is your substantiality, because you are not an idea. You are not a concept. You don't make any sense. You can't describe yourself either, can you? But you're not nothing. You're meaningful. You have qualities, you have flavors, you have, nuance. And your experience is the display of your own qualities. Your experience is like looking at yourself in a mirror. You're looking at all of your energies. What you notice in your experience is what you have in yourself. So you're seeing yourself in your experience, so you're feeding yourself with your own qualities, with your own nuance, with your own subtleties. When you can see light and appreciate it as light because you are light, you have light. You can see richness and appreciate it as richness because you are richness, you have richness, so on and so forth. Well, it's about quitting time. I'd like to thank you all for coming, and it was a pleasure to talk with you. And I hope you have a lovely, whatever you have.
If you weren't able to make a donation on your way in, if you could please do that on your way out.